Mark chapter 8 begins with a very interesting statement. It says, "When Jesus had again called all the disciples to himself, he said to them, 'Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees.'" Now, this is interesting because in the previous chapter, 7 of the disciples came to him and they asked him why they could uncast out a demon. But here it says that all of the disciples were gathered, and Jesus warned them about the leaven of the Pharisees. Leaven is a metaphor for their teaching. So Jesus was saying, beware of the teaching of the Pharisees and the reason why he warns them of that is because they had just come from a place where they had a debate with some Sadducees about divorce. So the Sadducees were a group of religious people who believed in the law of Moses, but they didn't believe in the oral tradition of the elders. They rejected the idea of the resurrection, and they rejected the existence of angels. But the Pharisees, on the other hand, believed in the law of Moses, plus the oral tradition of the elders. They believed in the resurrection, and they believed in angels. So it says here that the disciples were discussing this, debating with these Sadducees, and they forgot to bring bread for the multitude. That's what this passage is getting at. And so Jesus tells them, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which means beware of their teachings because they are dangerous. Then he says something very interesting. He says, "How is it that you do not understand that a man is not what goes into his mouth, but what comes out of his mouth? That is the one who defiles a man." Now, the context here is that they were arguing about divorce, and the Pharisees allowed a man to divorce his wife because of certain reasons. But Jesus says, hey, wait a minute. You're missing the bigger picture. A person is not contaminated by what he eats, but rather what comes out of his mouth. That is what contaminates a person. So he's talking about their evil hearts. He says, it's not what goes in that defiles a person, it's what comes out. That is what defiles a person. What comes out of a person's mouth reveals what's in the heart. Then, of course, we have the feeding of the 4,000. This was a different miracle than the feeding of the 5,000. That's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This one is only recorded in Mark. And it's interesting because he feeds 4,000 men, and Mark says, besides women and children, and he fed them with 7 loaves and a few fish. So Mark chapter 8 ends with Jesus sending his disciples to preach the kingdom and to heal the sick. Verse 15 says, "And he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." So they went out and they began to preach and perform many miracles, signs, and wonders by the power of the Holy Spirit. So I hope this blessed you. Until next time, be blessed.